Great afternoon, ma'am. Great afternoon, classmates. So for today, let's discuss the Chapter 11, Organizational Communication, presented by Group 3. And here are the following reporters. Bahande Enelin B, which is me, Dela Cruz Micaela, Jorta Jean, Paggy Christian Karen, and Sarmiento Jolo. And our chapter outlines, we have types of organizational communication, which are upward communication, downward communication, business communication, and informal communication. And we have interpersonal communication, which are problem area 1, intended message versus message sent, problem area 2, message sent versus message received, and then problem area 3, message received and versus message interpreted. And we have also the improving employee communication skills, which are interpersonal communication skills and then the written communication skills. So let's talk about the organizational communication. Organizational communication is the ability of an individual or group within a collective establishment to transmit and receive information within that collective establishment. So when we say the organizational communication, it is one of the main characteristics of effective employers and employees to be able to communicate effectively. So the sharing the ideas, the vision, the knowledge, and then the opinions. And when we say the organizational communication, it helps us to accomplish tasks relating to the specific roles and responsibilities of sales, services, and the productions. It is also acclimate to changes through individual and organizational creativity and adaptation. It completes tasks through the maintenance of policy, procedures, or regulations that support daily and continuous operations. And it also develop our relationships with where human messages are directed at people within the organization, their attitudes, morale, satisfaction, and fulfillment. And when we say the organizational communication, it is how organizations represent, present, and constitute their organizational climate and culture, the attitudes, the values, and then the goals that characterize the organizations and its members. And here are the types of organizational communications. To be an effective employee, manager, client, or consultant, it is essential to communicate effectively with others. Having the ideas, the knowledge, or opinion is useless unless you can communicate those concepts to others. So, the most communication in organizations can be classified into 4 types, which are upward communication, downward communication, business communication, and informal communication. The first type of organizational communication is upward communication. Upward communication is the communication within an organization in which the direction of communication is from employees up to the management. And when we say upward communication, it helps employees to express their requirements, their ideas, and feelings. So for the top management, upward communication is an important source of information for business decisions. It helps in alerting top management about the requirement of changes in the organizations. So let's say for the example, upward communication occurs when workers report to a supervisor or when team leaders report to a department manager. Items typically communicated upward include progress reports, proposal for project, budget estimates, grievances and complaints, suggestion for improvements, and schedule concerns. And in ideal upward communication, employees speak directly to management in an environment with an open door policy. When we say open door policy, it means that employees are free to talk with any manager at any time about any topic. Direct upward communication also may not be workable because employees often feel threatened by managers. and may not be willing to openly communicate bad news or complaints. So the next is the serial communication. When we say serial communication, it is communication opens a new window transmitted consecutively from one person to another. This communication patterns flows vertically and horizontally between three or more persons along the organizational hierarchy path. And to minimize the number of different people communicating with the top executive, many organizations use serial communication. Although this type of upward communication relieves the top executive of excessive demands, it suffers several serious drawbacks. The first drawback is that the content and tone of the message changes as it moves from person to person. And the second drawback to serial communication is that the bad news and complaints are seldom relayed, in part due to the stress associated with delivering bad news. And we have the minimized unpleasant messages effect. So, when we say the MUM effect, it refers to the tendency to avoid the communication of unpleasant information. It is also involves the tendency to withhold the bad news compared with the good news. But for an employee, the MUM effect is an excellent survival strategy. No one wants to be the bearer of bad news. According to Lee, 1993, when bad news is passed on to supervisors, employees tend to use politeness to soften the news. And according naman ni Heath, 1996, interestingly, people have no problem passing on bad news to peers, especially when the organizational climate is generally negative. And the third drawback to serial communications, especially with informal communication channels, is that it is less effective the farther away two people are from one another. That is, a supervisor is more likely to pass along a message to another supervisor if the two are in close physical proximity. So, when we say physical proximity, it is the tendency for people who form social relationships with individuals who are physically closer to them. Proximity, it means how close an object or person is physically to you. According to Valasic, Paranthia, George, and Nunamaker, 1993, as one would imagine, proximity does not play a role when messages are communicated electronically using email. But the importance of physical proximity cannot be overstated. And because of these problems with serial communication, organizations use several other methods to facilitate upward communication, which are the attitude surveys, focus groups, suggestion boxes, and the third parties. So, let's start the attitude surveys. When you say attitude surveys are usually conducted annually by an outside consultant who administers a questionnaire asking employees to rate their opinions on such factors as satisfaction with pay, working conditions, and then the supervisors. When we say attitude survey, it helps the company obtain insights related to the different attitudinal aspects of consumers toward the product, service, or the category. Although attitude surveys are commonly used, they are useful only if an organization takes the results seriously. If an organization finds that its employees are unhappy and does nothing to address the problem areas, the survey results will not be beneficial. But furthermore, to increase trust, an organization should share survey results with the employees. And the next is focus groups and exit interviews. It is the second method of upward communication is to hold focus groups. in which an outside consultant meets with group of current employees to get their opinions, suggestions. So when we say focus groups, it have the many application in the field of industrial and organizational psychology. So they can be used either as standalone research method or an add on the other methods. So focus groups are often used alone with the researcher wants to study the topic between a group of individuals who can provide significant insight beyond the traditional survey offers. So they are often used to collect data on participant attitudes or opinions about the particular topic or a set of related topics. For example, an organization might conduct a focus group to assess its employees' level of satisfaction with its current benefits program, to find out whether employees trust senior management, or even to look at employees' attitudes and opinions about the recognition they receive for doing their jobs. So the focus group, it is very useful, especially if the survey does not contain any write-in or open-ended questions, or if the results of the survey are unclear in some regard. So when we say focus groups, this information is then passed on to management to spark candid responses. The consultant is not to tell the names of the employees in the focus group and no direct quotes that could potentially identify a particular employee are passed on. And exit interviews with employees voluntarily leaving an organization also provide an excellent source of information. So although these interviews can be emotionally charged, an organization can learn much by listening to the real a reason that an employee is leaving the organizations, according to Phrase Blunt 2004. So when we say exit interviews, it is an interview conducted by an employer of a departing employee. They are generally conducted by a relatively neutral party such as human resources staff members. And the purpose of an exit interview is usually to gather data for improving working conditions and retaining employees. And the common questions asked in exit interviews are, what are your primary reasons for leaving? What did you find most satisfying about your job? What did you find most frustrating about your job? And were there any company policies or procedure that made your work more difficult? So, yun yung mga possible na magiging tanong sa exit interviews. And the third method of facilitating upward communication is the suggestion boxes. And these suggestion boxes have 1 to 800 numbers. And according to Phillips 2004, suggestion boxes provide a safe voice for subordinates and customers and essential feedback to the organization as well. So for these boxes to be beneficial, management must respond to suggestions and complaints in a timely manner. Management can do this by placing the suggestions, complaints on the bulletin board or the organization's intranets along with the management response. So in this way, employees receive feedback about their ideas, which further encourages other employees to use the boxes to communicate. So when we say suggestion boxes, it can improve better communication between the management and employees by giving them a formal way to share their ideas, increase innovation and problem solving. So these suggestion boxes encourages employees to not only identify problems but also suggest solutions. And the last is the third-party facilitators. The use of a third party such as Liaison or an ombudsperson is another method that can increase upward communication. So when we say liaison, It is the communication or cooperation with facilitates a close working relationship between people or the organizations. And the goal of the ombudsperson within the organizational is to work with individuals and groups in an organization to explore and assess them in determining options to help resolve conflicts, problematic issues, or concerns. And it is also to bring systemic concerns to the attention of the organization for the resolution. And the advantage of the system is that the ombudsperson is neutral and work for a solution that is acceptable to both employee and management according to Hirschman 2003. But furthermore, the ombudsperson is typically supervised at the vice presidential level, so she's not concerned about being fired if she steps on the few toes while looking for a solution. And the second types of the organizational communication is the downward communication. Downward communication is that of superior to subordinate or management to employees. So when we say downward communication, it is considered a key method not only of keeping employees informed but of communicating with vital information needed by employees to perform their job. Originally, downward communication involved newsletters designed to bolster employee morale by discussing happy events such as the three B's, which are the babies, the birthdays, and then the ball game scores. And the first downward communication is the bulletin board. So this bulletin board is to communicate non-work related opportunities such as scholarships, optional meetings, and then the items for sale. So these bulletin boards have the advantage of low cost and the wide exposure to both employees and then the visitors. So sa bulletin boards kasi is karamihan naman din natin ito makikita sa mga offices, sa schools, and etc. And then we have the electronic bulletin boards, also called in-house message networks, allowed to display even more current information. So these electronic bulletin boards ay makikita mo in the public places also. Pero meron din sa hospitals, sa schools, o etc. Basta makikita mo siya ang mga electronic na bulletin boards in kahit saan. The important information is seldom seen because the bulletin board is not the appropriate place to post a change of a policy or the procedure. And then the second is the policy manual. So this policy manual is the place for posting important changes in the policy or procedure. So this manual contains all the rules under which employees must operate. So the most manuals are written in highly technical language, although they should be written in a less technical style to encourage employees to read them as well as to make them easier to understand. So furthermore, the contents of these manuals are considered binding contracts by courts. So the manuals must be updated each time a policy changes. So this is usually done by sending updated pages to employees so that they can replace older material with newer ones. So to make this process easier, many organizations punch binder holes in the pages to facilitate their replacement. According to SOSNIN 2001C, advises that policy manuals should contain the following 6 disclaimers. So I have to read this only. Number 1, employment with the organization is at will. Number 2, the handbook does not create either an express or an implied contract. Number 3, the handbook is a set of guidelines and should not be considered all-inclusive. Number 4, the material in the present handbook supersedes material in previous handbooks. And then number 5, the handbook can be changed only in writing by the president of the organization, and it can be changed unilaterally at any time. And number 6, employees are subject to provisions of any amendments, detentions, and changes in the handbook. And here are the tips for effective writing that also apply to manuals are shown in Table 11.1. This organization thus had industrial organizational graduate student interns to develop a short essay to read the procedure manual that could be read and understood in a day. And the third downward communication is the newsletter. So these newsletters are designed to bolster employee morale by discussing happy or innocuous events such as the 3Bs, babies, birthdays, and ball game scores. And when we say newsletters, it is a good sources of information for celebrating employee success, providing feedback on how well the organization is doing, introducing a new employee, and providing the reminders about the organizational changes. But though many organizations provide newsletters in print format, so the trend is to send them electronically through either email or an intranet, according to Susnin's 2001 8. So this use or cyber publication saves printing expenses, allows for faster dissemination of information, and provides greater flexibility to making changes and updates. And the last of the downward communication is the intranets. So the intranets is to replace the bulletin boards, newsletters, and the company manuals. An increasing number of organizations are turning to intranets organization wide version of the intranets, according to Zidner 2005. So the other advantages include employee self-service, convenience, and 24-hour support, and the reduced paper, printing, and postage costs. And one of the most useful aspects of this internet is the speed at which the company can survey employees about the new ideas. So this internet is so very useful software. It allows the companies to build a private secure network that can only be accessed by the company employees. So when we say the intranet, it serves as the portal for employees to access internal and external resources and enables workers to communicate, collaborate, and share documents and other information. Though the potential for intranets has been barely been tapped, they are currently common resources for online employee handbooks, answers to frequently asked questions, employee activity calendars, forms that can be completed online, programs to write job description or performance appraisal, job postings, online benefits information, training courses, information about reward and incentives program. So, parang ang intranets is all packages na talaga siya. So, napakagandang communication when it comes to intranet.
Business communication. Business communication is the transmission of business-related information among employees, management, and customers. So, when we say business communication, ito yung pagbibigay o pagpapasa ng isang business-related information within the people inside or outside the company. Business communication has three methods and it includes the memos, telephone calls, and email and voicemail. So, memos, it provides the detailed information to a large number of people in a short period of time. With a widespread use of photocopy machines and computer printer, however, employees now receive so many memos that they often do not read them. So, ang memo daw ay considered as one of the most common type of business communication, most especially today na nauso yung photocopy machine and printers. So, ano nga ba ang purpose ng memo? So, the purpose of memo is to give instructions, reminders of events, action, or decision. Although memo can be considered as an effective communication, meron din itong pwedeng maging downside. So, madalas kasi na kapag natambakan na yung mga office worker ng memos, hindi na nila ito binabasa. Another method of business communication is the telephone calls. In the past, this method is appropriate only when the message was short and when only a few people needed to receive the communication. But with the advent of conference call, the number of people who can be reached by this method has certainly increased. One limitation of phone calls is that nonverbal cues are not available. Thus, a major portion of the message is not often communicated. So before daw, ginagamit lang tong telephone calls when giving short information or message only to those people who needed to receive the information. Before kasi hindi ka pwedeng tumawag sa maraming tao on the same time kasi bukod nga sa hindi pa yun pwede, malamang mas mataas yung babayaran mo sa landline kung isa-isahin mong tawagan lahat ng empleyado. Pero syempre, with today's generation, wherein there is what we call conference call, which we can speak to several people at the same time, is makakalesen pa to ng oras na nagagamit natin sa araw-araw. So, although hindi lahat ng information ay napag-uusapan ng mas detalyado, unlike when communicating sa face-to-face na every detail ay mapag-uusapan. However, video-enhanced teleconferencing or what we call video conference can now be used. In fact, many organizations save interview expenses by having job applicants across the company participate in such teleconference which allow both parties to see one another. So, madalas tong video conference ginagamit, most especially those applicants na nanggagaling pa overseas. At saka mas nire-recommend siya ng isang company sa isang applicants para makatipid ng pamasahe. That's most especially today na may pandemic, mas kailangan gamitin yung video conference when it comes to interviewing an applicant para maiwasan yung person-to-person contact. Another method of business communication is through email and voicemail. Voicemail and email are used primarily to exchange general or timely information and ask questions. They are not meant as substitute for important conversation. The advantages to email and voicemail include a reduction in the use of filling of paper and time saved by avoiding small talks when communicating a short message by phone. Email has many advantages over voicemail, including the ability to easily document the sending and receiving of email, the opportunity to communicate with many people at one time, and the potential for quick response time, especially when some form of messaging is used. So, email are often used to send documents that has important information na hindi kayang pag-usapan over telephone calls. Pwede din tong maging substitute sa memo to lessen the use of printing machine or paper. At para mas mabilis din ang pagpapasa ng information sa maraming tao and mas mabilis daw yung response when using email. On the other hand, voicemail can be used as substitute to telephone calls to avoid small talks or to avoid personal contact. In addition, another method of business communication is through business meeting. Research indicates that the average employee spends an average of 4.35 hours attending 3.34 meetings each week. Supervisors attended even more meetings for 5.2 hours and spends more time in these meetings for 6.6 hours. So, business meeting is one of the most effective method of communication. Why? Because it is where you can freely communicate with each other na walang naiiwan na impormasyon. And also, you can freely ask some question regarding the part na hindi mo naiintindihan or magets. Informal communication. It is transmitted through the grapevine, a term that can be traced back to the Civil War when loosely hung telegraph resembled grapevines. The communication across these lines are often distorted because unofficial employee communication is also thought to be distorted. The term has become synonymous with an informal communication network. Grapevines are common because they provide employees with information, power, and entertainment. Not surprisingly, the increased use of email has increased the importance of grapevines. So, what is grapevine? Ito yung pagpapasa ng information sa isang tao hanggang sa ipasa din ito yung information sa iba or hanggang sa malaman na ng buong tao sa isang company yung information na kailangang ipabatid. Also, grapevine is considered as a form of informal communication kasi it does not follow predetermined rule or mas mabilis na kumakalat yung information when using a grapevine communication. Research on the grapevine has supported several of Davis' findings. Sutton and Porter studied 79 employees in a state tax office and reached several interesting conclusions. They found that employees could be placed into one of three categories. First is the isolates. So, kapag isolates daw, ito yung mga employees na nakaka-receive ng kaunting information. Kapag naman daw, liaisons, ito yung mga ito yung mga employees na mas nakaka-receive ng information tapos ipapasa nila sa iba. While the dead-enders, sila yung mas nakakakuha ng information pero madalas lang nilang ipasa sa ibang employees. Although most people consider the grapevine to be inaccurate, research has shown that information in the grapevine often contains a great deal of truth, though it is often incomplete. A review of rumors in an organization indicates that organizational rumors are about 80% accurate. Such a statistic, however, can be misleading. So, although yung iba hindi pinapaniwalaan yung information na narinig nila, mas marami naman yung naniniwala na yung grapevines are mostly contains truth. Base na din siguro sa pagkakapare-pareho ng information na nare-receive nila galing sa iba't ibang tao. So, grapevine has two types of information. It is the gossip and the rumor. So, when we say gossip, ito daw yung mga information na nare-receive mo sa ibang tao na wala namang kabuluhan. Kapag rumor naman daw, ito yung mga information na maaaring may kabuluhan pero kadalasan ay chismis to patungkol sa ibang tao or ibang topics.
And next is interpersonal communication. So this communication is an exchange of information between two or more people. It is also an area of research that seeks to understand how humans use verbal and nonverbal cues to accomplish a number of personal and relational goals. There are three main problem areas where things can go wrong and interfere with the accurate transmission or reception of the message that discussed by the next reporters.
Problem Area 1. Intended message versus message sent. For effective communication, the sender must know what she wants to say and how she wants to say it. Interpersonal communication problems can occur when the message a person sends is not the message she intended. Thinking about what you want to communicate. Often the reason we don't say what we mean is that we are not really sure what we want to say. For example, think of using the drive-thru window at fast food restaurant. As soon as you stop, but before you have a chance to read the menu board, a voice crackles, "Can I take your order?" You intelligently reply something like, "Ah, could you hang on a minute?" and then quickly try to place order as the pressure builds. Practice what you want to communicate. Even though you may know what you want to say, communication errors can occur if you do not actually say what you meant to say. Thus, when communication is important, it should be practiced just as consultants practice before giving a training talk and actors rehearse before a performance. Learn better communication skills. Even if you know what you want to say and how you want to say it, communication error can still occur if you do not have the proper communication skills. It is essential to take course in public speaking, writing, and interpersonal communication that you will be better prepared to communicate effectively. Problem Area 2. Message sent versus message received. The actual word used. A particular word may mean one thing in one situation but something else in another. Take the word fine as an example. If I told you that you had fine jewelry, a particular word may also mean one thing to one person. For example, if someone said he was pissed in the United States, we would interpret that the person was angry. Yet in Ireland, we would interpret that person was drunk. Communication channel. Problem in communication can occur as a result of communication channel through which the message is transmitted. Information can be communicated in variety of ways such as orally and verbally, through a second party, or through a written medium such as letter or memo. For example, an employee being reprimanded while received the message very differently if it's communicated in a memo or an email rather than face to face. Noise. The noise surrounding a transmission channel can also affect the way a message is received. Noise can be defined as interference that affects proper reception of message. An obvious example is actual auditory noise, such as the sound of subway or elevated train interfering with conversation. Nonverbal cues. Much of what we communicate is conveyed by nonverbal means. Our words often say the one thing, but our action says another. For example, a supervisor may tell an employee that she is interested in hearing her opinions, while at the same time she is frowning looking out the window. The verbal message from the supervisor may be I care, but the nonverbal message is I'm bored. Body language. Body language. How we move and position our body language communicates much to other people. For example, in the United States, a thumbs up indicates agreement. In, a, in Australia, it is considered a rude gesture. In Japan, bowing is preferred to shaking hands. Raising or lowering the head or the shoulder may indicate superiority or inferiority respectively. A meta-analysis by De Paulo at 2003 found that when people lie, they are even more likely to pursue their lips, raise their chin, fidget, and show nervousness than when they are not telling a lie. Use of space. The way people make use of space also provide nonverbal cues about their feelings and personality. Dominant people or those who have authority are given more space by others and at the same time take space from others. For example, people stand further away from such status figures as executives and police officers and stand in office doorway rather than directly enter such a person's office. Intimacy zone extends from physical contact to 18 inches away from personal and is usually reserved for close relationships such as date, spouses, and family. When this zone is entered by strangers in crowded elevator and the like, we generally feel uncomfortable and nervous. Personal distance zone ranges from 18 inch to 4 feet away from person and is the distance usually reserved for friends and acquaintances. Social distance zone isa is from 4 to 12 feet away and it's the distance typically observed when dealing with business people and strangers. Public distance zone ranges from 12 to 25 feet away and is characteristics of such large group interactions as lecture and seminar. Use of time. The way people make use of time is another element of nonverbal communication. If an employee is supposed to meet with the supervisor at 1 and the supervisor shows up at 1:10, the supervisor is communicating an attitude about the employee. The importance of meeting or both tardiness is readily accepted from a higher status person than from a lower status person. Paralanguage involves the way we say things and consists of variables such as tone, tempo, volume, number, and duration of pauses and rate of speech. A message that is spoken quickly will be perceived differently from one that is spoken slowly. In fact, research has shown that people with fast speech rates are perceived as more intelligent, friendly, and enthusiastic than people with slow rates of speech. Artifacts. A final element of nonverbal communication concerns the objects or artifacts that a person wears or with which surrounds herself. A person who wears bright and colorful clothes is perceived differently from a person who wears conservative white or gray clothing. Similarly, the manager who places all of her awards on her office wall, the executive with a large and expensive chair, and the student who carries a briefcase rather than book bag are all making nonverbal statement about themselves. Open desk arrangement. Faces a desk against a wall so that visitors can sit next to the person who sits behind the desk. Closed desk arrangement. Places a desk so that a visitor must sit across from the person behind the desk. Visitors to office that use open rather than closed desk arrangements perceive the office to be more comfortable, and their occupants are friendlier and more trustworthy. Amount of information. The amount of information contained in message can affect the accuracy with which it is received. When a message contains more information than we can hold in memory, the information become leveled, sharpened, and assimilated. Level. Some of the information and important details are removed. Sharpened. The information, interesting and unusual information is kept. Assimilate. The information, it is modified to fit your existing belief and knowledge. Reactions to communication overload. With many jobs, communication overload can occur when an employee receives more communication than he can handle. When an employee is overloaded, she can adapt or adjust in one several ways to reduce the stress. Omission, error, queuing, escape, using a gatekeeper, or using multiple channels. Omission. One way to manage communication overload is omission. A conscious decision not to process certain types of information. For example, a busy supervisor may let the phone ring without answering it so that she can finish her paperwork. Although this technique can work if the overload is temporary, it will be ineffective if an employee misses an important communication. Error. In the error type of response, the employee attempts to deal with every message she receives, but in so doing, each processed message includes reception error. The processing errors are not intentional but result from processing more than can be handled. Perhaps a good example of this would be a student who has 2 hours in which to study 4 chapters for a test. A student using the error method would attempt to read and memorize all 4 chapters in 2 hours. Obviously, her test score will probably indicate that even though she did all of her reading, much of it was not remembered or not remembered correctly. Queuing. Another method of dealing with communication overload is queuing, placing the work into queue or waiting line. The order of the queue can be based on such variables as the message importance, timelines, or sender. For example, a memo sent by company president will probably be placed near or at the beginning of the queue as will an emergency phone message. Escape. If communication overload is prolonged, a common employee response is to escape, usually through absenteeism and ultimately through resignation. This response certainly is not beneficial to organization, but it can be beneficial to an employee if it protects her mental and physical health by relieving stress. An example of the escape response is often see with students who withdraw from college courses. A student may enroll in 6 classes and realize after 2 months that she does not have enough time to do all of the reading and writing required for 6 classes. Rather than choosing the error or omission strategy, either of which would result in lower grades, the student withdraws from one of her classes to reduce her overload. Use of gatekeeper. A response to communication overload used by many executives is the use of gatekeeper, a person who screens potential communication and allows only the most important to go through. Use of multiple channels. The final coping response to communication overload is the use of multiple channels. With this strategy, an organization reduces the amount of communication going to one person by directing some of it to another. For example, in a small restaurant, all of the problems involving customers, employees, finance, and vendors are handled by the owner. But as the business grows, the owner may not be able to handle all of the communication and thus may hire others to deal with finance and vendors.
Problem Area 3. Message received versus message interpreted. Lahat tayo ay may iba't ibang way ng pag-interpret ng message. Kumbaga, pwede mong masabi sa isang tao yung exact message na nais mong iparating, pero after mong ma-deliver yung message na yun, maaaring maiba yung pag-interpret niya doon sa sinabi mo. Kasi nga, even though a person knows what she wants to say and says it the way she wants, and even though another individual properly receives the intended message, its meaning can change depending on the way in which the receiver interprets the message. Dahil may mga instances talaga na maiiba at maiiba yung mismong message na sinabi mo sa isang tao, doon na magsisimula yung pagkalat ng mga fake news o mga haka-haka dahil sa maling pag-interpret niya ng message na sinabi mo. Dito na pumapasok yung kahalagahan ng listening skills. Ano nga ba ang pakikinig? Sinasabi nila na ang pakikinig daw ay isang skill. Bakit? Kasi listening is a key to effective communication. Natututo tayo sa pamamagitan ng pakikinig. Listening is probably the most important communication skill that a supervisor should master. In a study of managers, Ticos and Stevens, 1957, found that 70% of the white-collar workday is spent communicating. Of that, 9% is spent in writing, 16% in reading, 30% in speaking, and 45% in listening. Thus, a manager spends more time listening than doing any other single activity. Kahit na ang pakikinig ay may pinakamalaking parte sa mga white-collar jobs, sinasabi na ang mga tao daw ay may poor listening effectiveness. Kumbaga, hindi lahat ng naririnig mo ay maaari mong maalala after. Although much of this loss can be attributed to poor memory practices, some is the results of poor listening habits. Since different person has different listening style, what can be done to increase listening effectiveness? Let's discuss one by one on how these styles differ from each other. Geyer and Downey 1980 have developed a test, the Attitudinal Listening Profile, to measure an employee's listening style. Their theory postulates 6 main styles of listening. This includes leisure, inclusive, stylistic, technical, empathic, and non-conforming. Number 1 is leisure listening. Is practiced by good time people who listens only for words that indicate pleasure. Makikinig ka lang kapag feel mo na interesado para sa'yo yung isang topic. For example, ikaw yung tipo ng estudyante na makikinig lang sa professor kapag nagjo-joke lang siya. Dito, yung mismong joke niya lang yung pinakikinggan mo. Wala ka nang pakialam sa kung ano pang ituturo niya sa araw na yon, basta sa joke pa lang niya interesado. Number 2, inclusive listening. Dito, yung pinakikinggan mo lang ay yung main idea. For example, nag-announce yung teacher nyo na gagawa kayo ng research paper. Nagbigay siya ng mga need na isama at tandaan sa paggawa nito. Ngayon, alam mo lang nagagawa kayo ng research paper kasi yun lang yung pinakinggan mo. Wala ka nang pakialam sa mga details tungkol sa gagawin nyo. Basta alam mo nagagawa kayo ng research paper. Another example is in an hour-long meeting full of details and facts about a decline in sales. The only information this type of listener will hear is the main point that sales are down and that things had better improve. Number 3, stylistic listening is practiced by the person who listens to the way the communication is presented. Stylistic listeners will not listen unless the speaker's style is appropriate, the speaker looks the part, or both. Dito, parang may standard yung isang listener bago siya makinig sa sasabihin mo. For example, sinabi mo na may gaganaping party sa bahay nyo. Magpipay attention lang siya kung yung way ng pagkakasabi mo ay mukha kang excited or cool, na mukha talagang may party na gaganapin sa bahay nyo. Doon lang siya makikinig if narinig niya or nakita niya na mukha talagang may party na gaganapin. Number 4, technical listening is the style practiced by the jackwebs of the listening world, those who want just the facts. The technical listener hears and retains a large amount of detail, but she does not hear the meaning of those details. Dito, napakinggan mo lahat ng detalye na kailangan, pero hindi mo alam yung ibig sabihin ng mga napakinggan mo. For example, Nag-announce yung science teacher mo na may moving exam kayo bukas. Alam mo lahat ng details tungkol sa sinabi niya, pero hindi mo alam kung anong ibig sabihin ng pinapagawa niya, which is yung moving exam. Number 5, empathic listening. Tunes into the feelings of the speaker and of the 6 listening types is the most likely to pay attention to nonverbal cues. Dito, mas binibigyan pansin ng listener yung mga nonverbal cues such as facial expression, gestures, tone of voice, or body language habang nakikinig siya. And by means of nonverbal cues, nagkakaroon ng relationship between understanding at sa kung ano yung nais na iparating ng speaker base sa nonverbal cues niya. Number 6, non-conforming listening is practiced by the individual who attends only to information that is consistent with her way of thinking. If the non-conforming listener does not agree with the speaker, she will not listen to what the speaker says. Dito, pinakikinggan lang ng listener yung speaker na kaparehas niya ng point of view. Ngayon, kung ang listener at ang speaker ay may magkaibang pananaw, hindi niya papansinin yung sinasabi mo kasi gusto niya lang pakinggan yung taong kaparehas niya mag-isip. For example, may debate kayo about sa political stance. Ngayon, yung side ng speaker, gusto niyang president si Bongbong Marcos, pero ikaw gusto mong president si Leni Robredo. Ngayon, hindi mo papakinggan yung side ni Bongbong Marcos kasi hindi kayo parehas ng political stance. So regardless sa sasabihin nung kabilang side, hindi mo yun papakinggan unless maka-Leni Robredo yung sasabihin ng speaker which is same side with the listener. How listening styles affect communication? Ngayon, balikan natin yung pinaka-main point ng 6 styles of listening. Suppose an employee approaches a supervisor and tells her that she has a temperature of 106 degrees. How would each of the 6 listeners react? The leisure listener would pay little attention to the employee because she does not like to hear about unpleasant things and illness certainly is not pleasant. Dito, hindi siya magpe-pay attention kasi hindi naman siya interesado kung may sakit yung employee na yun o wala. The inclusive listener would probably tell a story about when she had a high temperature, thinking that the topic of conversation is fever. Since interesado lang siya sa main idea, aalamin niya ngayon kung paano nagkasakit yung employee na yun. The stylistic listener would pay attention only if the employee sounded and looked ill. Dito, gustong malaman ng listener kung yung talagang employee na yon ay nanghihina yung boses o matamlay para malaman niya na talagang may sakit to. The technical listener would hear every word but would not realize their meaning. Dito, makikinig lang yung listener pero hindi ibig sabihin nun ay aalamin niya yung mga meaning ng sinasabi mo. Andyan lang siya para makinig. For example, nagsabi yung employee na may sakit tungkol sa mga prescription sa kanya ng doktor. Ngayon, papakinggan lang siya ng technical listener kahit na hindi nito alam yung ibig sabihin ng sinasabi niya na prescription sa kanya ng doktor. The empathic listener would be the only one who would understand the real point of the communication. Dito, wala siyang pakialam sa rason kung bakit nagkasakit yung employee. Nagpe-pay attention lang siya sa way ng pagkukwento ng employee, which is yung non-verbal cues. The non-conforming listener would pay little attention to the employee. Since hindi naman sila same ng pinagdadaanan, hindi siya papakinggan ng listener. Kaya ito yung tipo na hindi pumapansin dun sa employee na may sakit kasi wala naman siyang sakit katulad ng employee na yun. Ito yung lagi nating tatandaan para malaman natin kung ano yung pagkakaiba-iba ng 6 styles of listening. For leisure listener, words that indicate pleasure. For inclusive listener, the main ideas. For stylistic listener, way in which it is presented. For technical listener, factual information versus the meaning. For empathic listener, the nonverbal cues. And for the non-conforming listener, the non-consistent way of thinking. Ayan yung dapat nating tandaan para hindi tayo malito.
Tips for effective listening. These tips or listening styles serve as improve your listening effectiveness in other ways by stop talking, Let the other person finish speaking. Focus on what the person is saying rather than on how well they are saying it, what your next response will be, or what you will eat for lunch. Try to understand what the other person is trying to say. Ask questions to make sure you understand the person's point, but don't ask so many questions that they distract the speaker. Be patient and keep an open mind. If you disagree, you can always do so after the person is finished talking. Show the speaker you want to listen by using nonverbal cues such as making eye contact and nodding your head. Remove or resist distractions that will keep you from listening. Be silent for a few seconds after the person has finished speaking. This will encourage the person to continue to talk. You will be sure when they have finished talking, and it will give you time to respond calmly. So that is the specific tips to understand on how to improve your listening style. Next is emotional state. The state of a person's emotion, especially with regard to pleasure or dejection. His emotional state depended on her opinion. So the interpretation of a message can certainly be affected by the receiver's emotional state when we are mad, anxious, depressed, elated, or upset. We do not think as clearly as when our moods are more moderate. Next is cognitive ability or cognitive communication abilities. Are those thought processes that allow humans to function successfully and interact meaningfully with each other. Examples of these are orientation, attention, memory, problem solving, and executive function. It is another factor that can affect the way in which a received message is interpreted. This is a way that a person can receive a message exactly as it was sent, yet not be bright enough to understand it. Then, bias. Bias affects the way we communicate, often obscuring our feelings and intentions. Biases obviously affect our ability to interpret information we receive. For example, we can hate a political candidate so much that we can refuse to process any of the positive information we hear about her. We do, however, process every piece of information that is consistent with our opinion. Next is improving employee communication skills. Under of improving employee communication skills is interpersonal communication skills. One of the most common methods used to increase interpersonal communication skills is the training workshop conducted by an outside consultant. Although a large number of consultants lead communication workshops, such as workshops often bring only short-term improvement in skills. Interpersonal skills are the skills required to effectively communicate, interact, and work with individuals and groups. Those with good interpersonal skills are strong verbal and nonverbal communicators and are often considered to be good with people. Whether they are used in your career or personal life, these skills are important for success. According to a recent LinkedIn survey of 291 hiring managers, interpersonal skills are both more important and also harder to find. So why interpersonal skills matter? Because most of what we do in life requires interaction with other people. In order to be successful in your career or having meaningful friendships, it's critical to be good or getting along with others, while interpersonal skills are often considered to be something that comes naturally, that you're either blessed with them or not. The truth is that they can be learned. Next is written communication skills. Attempts to improve the quality of written communication have generally taken two paths. One approach concentrates on improving the writer's skills, and the other concentrates on making material easier to read. Under of written communication skills is improving writing. Writing skills are an important part of communication. With increased use of email, effective writing skills are more essential than ever. Good writing skills allow you to communicate your message with clarity and ease to a far larger audience than though face-to-face or telephone conversation. This section of skills you need aims to make you think about your writing, from grammar, spelling, and punctuation, how to plan your writing, and the various processes and checks to go through before pressing print or broadcasting your message online. It also provides guides for specific pieces of writing that you may need to produce, whether at school, university, or in the workplace. There are many times in your life when you will be asked to write something very specific, whether this is to take notes of conversation, writing the minutes of a formal meeting, or prepare a report. All these types of writing require specific skills and usually a particular style. Next is readability. Readability refers to how easy it is to read and understand a text depending on its unique features. This can be measured using metrics such as the number of syllables in a sentence or variety of words used to calculate a level and a readability score. Written communication can break down when material is too difficult for many employees to read. Providing employees with important material to read will be an effective communication form only if the employees can understand what is written. Readability measured by use of different method or formula. One of the formula is Frye readability graph. Uses the average number of syllables per word and the average length of the sentences to determine readability. Another formula are the Flex index. Uses the average sentence length and the number of syllables per 100 words. FOG index uses the number of words per sentence and the number of 3 syllables words per 100. Dale-Chal index uses the number of words that are not included in a list of words known by 80% of 4th graders.
And that's the end for our topic for today. Thank you for listening. Keep safe always and God bless us all.